This column shows you the inherited values. This shows you the localized values. So these are things I'm inheriting. Don't even have to touch them. If I want to change it, then I'm changing it here.
So you would have something like this for a form, just a basic form object, and then you customize it like this to make the form yours for your application.
That's right.
Hello, this is Rick Tashma. Join Gary Huffer and me and explore with us some thoughts about how Symbion can extend, coexist, and or be deeply integrated with existing multi-value applications. We will show how complex data processing functionality can be defined as callable objects and be integrated with an existing application by adding fewer than 5 lines of program code around an input. Symbion is a reliable and feature-rich platform for multi-value installations of any size. It is used for application development and deployment and data processing and reporting throughout the entire evolution and life cycle of a business computing process.
What started this is, if I go back to a few years ago when I worked at Victory Packaging, I've known Gary for about, 20 years or something like that. Met him originally probably through Pete Schellenbach, who's the author of AccuTerm. I have to admit, I don't like writing screens. I hate writing code to write forms. I like writing, when I write code, I like to write code for like algorithms and things that have to do internally with processing data. I detest writing screens. I've never been good at it, and I don't like it. And so I contacted Gary, started talking to him again about Symbion, where it was at that point, and he had started to recast it as a graphical tool using the GUI capabilities of AccuTerm. And I saw what Gary was doing, and I thought, this is just amazing, stunning. What we're going to do then, given that introduction, and for those of you who don't know me, I apologize. My name is Richard or Rick Tashma, Gary Huffer. And so what we've got, what Gary and I have worked out for this is the idea that what we want to do is show how easily it's possible to get to immediately, almost immediately, add utility functionality to extend an existing character application. So we're going to show you a very simple just like 20 lines of code to just put up 2 fields, an ID field and a data field. And that's not the important part. We wanted to keep that piece of it very simple. But then we're going to enhance that to roll in features through an API that exists in Symbion that we will display both in a character flavor, so that you could, for example, use it if you're running SB, for example, or SB Plus, I should say, how you could integrate some of the capabilities of Symbion into SB Plus without mucking up your existing environment. And I'm saying this with all confidence in front of Kevin King, and if I'm wrong, I know you'll correct me, and I want you to, but I'm confident that
More and more about Stuart.
Okay, that's true. That's true. I have to defer to Stuart. But between the two of you, I've got like the authoritative powerhouse here, and that'll be an interesting conversation. Can this be done with SB Plus the way we believe that it can, as we will show? And also with an ordinary character application. And then once we've completed that, and we're going to show that both in a character demonstration and a graphical demonstration. We're using AccuTerm, so we have the capabilities of AccuTerm, and you'll see that.
So this is just a simple program. It's not meant to demonstrate anything other than just a technique of how we can actually dovetail some enhanced functionality into an existing program.
There you go. Good. Well, that helps.
So in this case, we're just opening up a file. We're prompting for an ID. We're showing one piece of information in that file, updating it, coming back and doing it again. So there's no significance to this program other than just to show you a feature here. So if we're to run it,
That's it. There's your form, okay? So the idea here in our concept is this could be typically how you have something that functions, you key something in, it returns a value, right? That was a straightforward retrieve the item and return the data. Nothing more complicated than that. We didn't want that part of it to be sophisticated. Where we go from here is what's interesting. It's what Gary in Demo 2 has added to the capabilities around the first line, enter the zip code, okay? Lookups and other features that are not necessarily directly relevant to this particular form. You're going to see things like a calendar that are not necessarily relevant to this form, but what we wanted to do was start with something trivially simple and show, when you see the program code, you'll see a case statement. And so the case for all these key characters that Gary will enter, these all are parsed through the case statement, and they call things or trigger things which, if you extrapolate the idea, you could include in any input in the processing after any input statement. Okay, we're just going to show you several possibilities. So don't get hung up when you see the calendar come up relating to the zip code. It's simply a hook.
sort of Demo 2 in a character connection mode first?
Let's go ahead and do that, yes please. So we're going to demo this first as in a character format. What you're going to see is Symbion operating as a character application, a character platform, because Symbion will operate both in character and in graphical mode simply by setting a flag. And so what Gary has, he set a flag when he keyed in Demo 2 followed by the C. The C was a flag to operate this piece of the demo in character mode. Hit it, Gary.
Okay, since Rick likes calendars, we'll go ahead and say that I want to bring up a calendar. So literally all we do, and we'll see the code in a few minutes, is a simple line of code that instructs from that ID field to tap into some additional functionality. So in this case, I prompted for the calendar. Again, not necessarily relevant here, but if I already pick a date, and that happens to be the date I picked internally. Again, not relevant necessarily for the zip code aspect, but just to show you the application in terms of we simply brought up a calendar, picked from a calendar, brought it back to the piece of information. And that would be relevant to an ID field or any number of fields that you have on your screen. So again, the objective would be here, we want to show how easy it is to take an existing application that is tried and true, but all of a sudden you've got a request from a user base that says, hey, you know, it'd be neat if we could do this, or gosh, I wish we could do that. So rather than maybe tinkering with what the existing application is, or maybe it would be very difficult to write code to maintain it, again, our objective here is to show how easily we can just add utility functionality to that existing application.
Right.
And achieve the end result without touching it, basically, other than the hook out of that particular.
And just to clarify, that calendar that you saw is a Symbion character mode form. So if you go into the designer, which we may or may not do later on after the questions, if you go into the designer, you'll see the designer that defines that form. There's nothing unique about that form as a calendar. It's basically a character grid, and that's defined in a Symbion container for character in character mode. If somebody is interested in seeing more about that later on, we can certainly show you. But that's a built-in. I mean, that comes with Symbion. We've got a variety of things that are just delivered with it, and that's one of them because it's so commonly useful.
And I think, again, what we're trying to point out, if it wasn't clear, is if we were running on a non-AccuTerm platform, so whatever terminal emulation your particular application is running, whether SB Plus or Host Access or TinyTerm or whatever it happens to be, we can plug this functionality in on a character mode basis. If we want to render it graphically, then we have to right now be on an AccuTerm termination.
Right, you have to be using AccuTerm because we're using the AccuTerm GUI rendering engine on the client, which you'll see in time.
I think what started this conversation earlier last week when Rick and I were discussing is that, what do we typically see lacking in a lot of existing applications is sophistication around lookups. We've got a field and, we've hard coded the situation that it can only be validated against 3 or 4 different things. But what if I wanted to tableize that? What if I wanted to enhance that? What if I wanted to give additional search capabilities off existing fields that are lacking that particular capability as it stands right now? And so that was really our start of our conversation, I think, is how can we use existing objects to tap into to give us more sophisticated search result capability.
Right, because Gary, because of the history of Symbion, I should digress for just a moment and say that Gary is originally a CPA. He came to this as a CPA, like in another century, like the rest of us.
Oh, that's sad.
And when Gary came to R83 originally, he found it to be incredibly useful and powerful, but also incredibly lacking in its capabilities of building screens. So he started doing something that was interesting to him to create an accounting application which still exists, and you'll see it later on. The important thing is that over the years that grew into its own product, and it's been used by Symbion has been used by companies and municipalities, and they kept working with Gary and saying, we need this kind of functionality, we need this kind of functionality. We want to be able to do lookups on these cascading rule sets and all kinds of really sophisticated capabilities. Over the 30 years, Gary has built in some almost stunning capabilities into the lookups alone in Symbion. So for some people in some settings, just the lookup capabilities of Symbion in the lookup object, or that feature set, is a compelling value in and of itself. So that's where we started talking about, well, if we have an existing character application and we want to be able to pass some complex string or whatever it might be, or have some complex lookup against a data source that might be cascading to other data, and we don't want to write a mess of code and then have to maintain it, could we create objects around it? And that's where, and then retrofit that into an existing application, and that's where this idea came from.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, the functionality that we're going to see here has always been driven from the user side, as opposed to the technical side.
Mm-hmm.
We interrupt this presentation for a news flash. Our intention in this 2015 presentation was to highlight the capabilities of AccuTerm and the AT-GUI engine as a pathway for evolution beyond the limitations imposed by many legacy applications. However, it has also become ever more important in new application development to isolate the stable and refined functions of data processing from the rapidly changing landscape of the user interface. Symbion provides a spectacular possibility for approaching that problem in a novel way. How? Symbion has always been acknowledged as being a very adaptable and flexible environment for data acquisition, validation, manipulation, and retrieval. In order to create such a durable and scalable platform, Gary crafted a layered and interconnected model that is referred to as object-modular. Symbion is designed, at its core, to take full advantage of the tight integration among MVBasic, the file system, and the program execution model available with current multi-value database hosts. Unlike an object-oriented language, the object-modular architecture is comprehensive and unique to multi-value. All objects are defined, coded, tested, and documented with the graphical Symbion Design Studio. With the object-modular architecture, the light user interface layer is decoupled from the dark data storage, retrieval, manipulation, reporting, logging, and other layers of the application. All objects are stored automatically in reusable, scalable, and maintainable object libraries in the multi-value file system. There's a lot more to Symbion than meets the eye. As you will see in this presentation, the object libraries, in combination with the concise API that is unique to Symbion, enables a type of application development and lifecycle maintenance that is exceptional in the multi-value marketplace.
So what we're doing is we're operating against the zip code file here that has, what is it, about 47,000 items in it. And so in this case, what you're seeing is an in-string lookup for 8001 against the item ID field, because we told it against the item ID field. It could be against the item ID field and any other field that displays on any other column that displays. So you can see that 8001 could either be at the beginning end or the trailing end of the string. It's a string search. So in this case, we have 20 items. That's 20 lines of return that display here. So if you leave this and then search on 800. Now we have 138 lines returned, and again, it's going to, using the cursor keys, we can cursor down, we can page down, we can go top, we can go home and end, and to make a selection, it's the space bar, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you go down to like 8006, let's say, up in the middle there, and make a selection, there you go, okay? So what we did there is when we hooked this bit of program code in, the return value was returned right back into the input statement as though we had, or into the processing after the input statement as though we had keyed it in, okay? Nothing magical other than I'm just assuring you that that's how that thing behaved. So Symbion returned the value back into that program that we saw earlier when we added the additional lines of code. So now if you continue, Gary, if you want to go to like 8, and so now we've got 17,000 lines, and of course, again, nothing terribly significant about it, but if you you can jump down, you can cursor down through that, right? So it's moving down through that data very rapidly. Page-wise, was that the page? That was page down, right? So we're paging down through the data. Our point here is, if you have an orders file, let's say, that has 1 million orders in it, 100,000 or 500,000 or 1 million orders, and you want to return a subset of it and be able to move through it quickly without having to use some of the techniques that I've seen used for paging. This is a built-in in Symbion which you can simply hook. It's there. Use it for your convenience. Now if we leave this and hit a question mark, which is the character we chose to use, it will return the entire 47,714 lines from the file. Again, we don't need to scroll down through it. You get the point. So any questions about that particular piece of the functionality?
What's the code look like?
We'll get there. It's in terms of the retrofit to accomplish that, it's probably just that piece of it, Gary, probably about 10 lines.
Well, that piece of what?
If Kevin wanted to take that, incorporate just this kind of functionality, what you get, what we've done with what we've shown so far, because if we look at the program code, it's got all these other capabilities in it.
For this one, Kevin, what it is it's a creation of an object first that's reusable. We just happen to tapping into it. To actually apply it to the existing code, there's one line of code.
So you can retrofit it with probably less than 10 lines of code. You've got to, there's an include, there's an include and
there's
2 or 3
some statements
lines
that you do to prefix the environment.
Right.
But the actual hook is just a single line of code.
It's a macro. It's a macro command. Yes.
Referring to the object, and we'll look at the definition of the object, and we're just using one small capability of the object to show this. This is an object that's set to search on a full wildcard string search on the entire file. And so it's pretty efficient in terms of retrieving information. but that's just one small piece of the object in terms of what you can do with that. So when we actually look at the object, you'll see read next kinds of selects, sound X, meta sound X, B trees, virtually anything you want in terms of building into the object to retrieve the information. But again, the interface is just a single line of code to present the results from the object.
Once the environment is set up, it's one line of code to invoke it. And so if we leave this, Gary, and while we can't run the speakers because we get the feedback, what were the other options?
Let's go into the graphical conditions.
Oh, you want to do that?
Options.
Okay, sure.
I think that
absolutely.
It shows.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, so you get the. So now we're going to run demo 2 in graphical mode as opposed to the character mode. Okay, so
let's just repeat the same.
Right, we'll repeat the same thing. So we start with 8001, and because this is AccuTerm, we've now invoked the AccuTerm GUI. Because Pete wrote it this way, the character screen does not go away. We can tell it to minimize itself, but instead we allow the Windows form to appear over the character screen because that suits our purposes here. So again, we've got the same 20 pieces of data, and so needless to say, you can cursor down and you can make a selection, right? So if you want to make a selection from, go ahead and select that, Gary.
Okay, so.
And there you go, okay? If we drop back and do let's just go to like 8 or 80, so we're not, is that, oh, you know what? That's okay. Go back, Gary, for a moment, because I want to take that a step at a time. So 80800. Okay, so now we've got 138 lines, and the thing I want to illustrate is we got a scroll bar, magic, right? Magic of Windows. Okay, so what we've done is we've fed the 138 lines with the 2 columns of data to AccuTerm, to the GUI engine, and the GUI engine is rendering the Windows form and populating with the data, and internally we fed it all 138 lines. Now, the next thing is where some of the really slick stuff happens. So now if we just do 8, let's just go with 8. We now have the 17,000 lines, right? Again, and I'm going to. Are we going to see the thing we talked about yesterday?
We can. Yeah, we go to the second business rule and do it. It's on the second business rule.
Okay. So what we've got now is something that's really unique. This is a unique use of the grid. Because Windows grids will roll over and die when you feed them a lot of data, not only does it take a lot of time, but also it sucks up massive resources in Windows. What Gary and I spent, but Gary codes, he spent a lot of time. We iterated this thing like 50 times. These buttons here are actually simulating the functionality of a scroll bar, and we're doing that intentionally, and we've got another rendering that will actually add a scroll feature to this. What we've displayed here is what we've passed to the client is just this number of lines. The number of lines you see here, whatever that is, about 20 lines, is all the data that we passed. When Gary goes ahead and uses the cursor down, go ahead and use the cursor down first, Gary. When he cursors down and holds the cursor key, just hold it down.
Okay.
This is calling back to the host, and the host is updating a line at a time to the grid. So the host is communicating with the client and saying, add this to the bottom and let this data go off the top. So it is instructing the client to delete a line at the top, to add a line at the bottom, so that we don't actually ever get a Windows scroll bar. The beauty of this is that we can have 17,000 lines, or when we do the question mark, we're going to get 40,000 lines, but we're not actually passing that data. We're just passing 20 lines at a time, and once we pass the 20 lines and we add one, we're adding one line of data and an instruction to delete. So we're just shifting the display up by one. It's extremely fast. And beyond that, if he pages down, okay, and again, in the interests of performance, because this thing was originally conceived for an end user who had 1 million lines of data, truly. It was more than 1 million lines, wasn't it?
It's more like 5 million.
Okay, it was a data cube. They built a BI engine around Symbion, and they had 5 million rows of data, and they needed to be able to scroll through it, and that's where the intelligent scroll widget came from. Was that need, and now it's a built-in. So, and it gets invoked by a threshold counter. That's why we showed you what it looks like when you had 20 pieces of data, and when you had 200 or 300 pieces of data, we got the Windows scroll bar. We set a threshold in here for, I don't remember what the number is, around 300. That when we exceed that threshold, it automatically changes the instruction from the host to the client, bringing up the intelligent scroll bar and alters the behavior. You can set the threshold to 0, you can set it to 1,000, whatever you think you need, but it's a parameter that we define to tell it when it gets beyond this size, stop sending all the data to the grid at that point all at once, and switch modes into this behavior, which is all driven by the host. All of this is driven by the host. So if Gary goes ahead and holds down the page down, something interesting is going to.
Well, you want me to use the
Go ahead and use that then. Something interesting is going to happen. That's intentional. Again, performance. We want to be able to move through the data quickly. So this, what you're seeing there, where it intentionally makes the grid small and then re-renders the whole grid, is when he gets to the bottom. I'm sorry, when he stops, he got to the bottom, I think.
I did.
So that behavior was an intentional behavior. It's all about performance. Why send 20 lines of data when all you want is to get a sense for where you are?
And that's the objective here. I mean, it's fast enough, but yet still slow enough that your eye can pick up on data content. So you're looking for something, a pattern in your mind, and you can basically then stop around where you're looking at.
So,
and as Rick mentioned, all this is properties to the object,
right,
which also can be tuned at runtime to the object. So the object can be changed at runtime based upon the nature of the application and how it's running.
these are all settings. And the form, this form is a built-in. This is another built-in that's delivered with Symbion. You don't have to create the form, it just comes with it. But it's another form. It's just another container form that we deliver with Symbion because we need it. And it makes sense because it's so commonly used. So now if we switch...
Want to switch to the second row?
Yeah, so what he's going to do is he's going to hit it. The object, the lookup object, beautiful. It works so nicely. The lookup object has that we're going to get into the lookup object. We're going to show you how the lookup object is constructed. The lookup's capability in Symbion supports either cascading rules where you can point a rule at a data set and then take the result from that and then feed that into another rule and another rule and another rule ad infinitum. Or you can create a set of rules that you, with a single F key, which I think was F11, is that right? Mm-hmm. You can step through the rules, which means that one of the things that we can do is we can set up different rules to look at the data different ways, and as an example, either use the F11 key to step through the rules that we want to view the data with different filters, rather than necessarily, we could build a form with the filters on the form, or we can just predefine these and use F11 to step through those different rule sets. And there's also a way that we can look at the names of the rules, because the rules are all named, and we can reference them by name too. Or we could put an instruction in there that says, given this condition, choose this rule, right? We can set up a conditional on that too. So what we've done in this second rule here, we only have two. You can, we commonly use one, but you could have 20 or 100, whatever. The difference, the distinction is that any particular rule is going to point to a certain data source.
Give them a smaller set if you want to page back and forth.
Okay. So in this case, we have 206
Actually,
lines.
let me go back to the account.
Okay. So we got.
Go back to 17,000.
Okay, good. So what Gary just did was just to be clear, he escaped out of here, went back to the ID field, entered a value, processed, called the rule. The rule returned the default result in the result set in the default display. And then he hit F11 and it changed the display into this. So the host instructed AccuTerm GUI repaint the window like this. One of the things you might have noticed is that it added another column. We could have had, we have 3, we could have any number of columns. We could have 1, we could have 12, it doesn't matter. Each rule gives you the opportunity to define the columns that you want to display. It also gave us the opportunity to change the foreground color, the background color, and the font size. So we did, just to illustrate how easily that's done.
Yeah, I think a good example, typically in an application, you have a search result that maybe shows a marginal amount of data, and someone wants to drill down to it to see more detail, because they need to see that detail and say, yeah, that's the one I'm looking for. And so you can cascade that kind of approach via the multiple business rules as well. So not only iterative in the sense of feeding one result to another result, but taking the same result and retooling it and recasting it to a different presentation. I mean, this ultimately might be a third business rule that actually presented in a form. It
Right.
actually go to the form and show the results in a form. So there may be a whole lot of data content that's now showing to actually make the end result select search. But I think as Rick indicated, typically it's one rule, typically.
Usually.
But the idea is it can be as sophisticated or as simple as you really want it to be.
Exactly. The other thing that changed here is you notice we have more buttons, and we also have this here. This whole thing switches on with a flag. And what this does is it gives us the same, what the 4 buttons you saw before are this one, and the top 2. So we've added these 3 buttons in the middle, which we'll get to in a moment. But we've also added this, which is not exactly what you think of as a scroll bar, because when you have 10,000, 100,000, 1 million lines of data, a scroll bar makes no sense. I mean, how do we impute any meaning to that? The scroll wheel makes no sense. If you want to page down, you can use the button, or you can use the page up, page down buttons on your keyboard. So what this does instead is you can either drag this and it will move, or if you go ahead and let go, Gary. So we're now 28% of the way through the data set, through the 17,000 lines. But notice also as Gary moves through here, it's showing a relative position in the data. And when you click there, it jumps you to that position in the data. So if you have 1 million rows, these are all different ways we can jump through the data. This can also be enhanced. The default behavior is percentage. It can also be enhanced that if you have, let's just say you've got a very large set of names, people's names, and you want to be able to, the granularity of this was, what, about 100, it's 100, isn't it?
Well,
typically, I mean,
the practical
as a practical matter, it's 100.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine you've got a data set with names and everybody's index name, and you've got 100,000 people's names. And let's just say that we can reasonably determine that if we choose 2-character or 3-character strings, we can pretty well divide up the data in about 100 chunks that we like. So we could create a table with 2 or 10 or 100 elements in the table that says these are the entry points. So it could be like, you know, AA and.
Well, to keep it even simpler, maybe just 26 points.
If you want that.
You know,
yes, it doesn't have to be 100. It could be 26 characters, or maybe because S is such a well-represented letter, maybe you want to subdivide S 3 times. Mm-hmm. So you would load that data into a table and override the 1 to 100%. So when you hover over the points, instead of showing the tooltip of 61, it might show Q or SA, SG, SV, for example. Okay? So, but when we click on it, we can either drag this, or when we click any place in there, it jumps there. When we were developing the demo for us tonight, that seemed to Gary and to me, but I must admit, from my point of view, I thought that's very compelling considering the quantity of data that we are commonly dealing with and how challenging that can be if we're in a character environment. Yes, can we do it? Of course, we do it all the time. But is it a pain? It can be a pain. Here,
actually, what I find is interesting in terms of quantity, I think it's actually more difficult in a graphical environment than in a character environment.
True.
For quantity.
True, especially because of the scroll bar.
Particularly
right?
Because of the obstacle of the scroll bar.
Right.
How do you get around the Windows feature?
The Windows
really
behavior.
Well, in that regard.
So that's why we built the intelligent scroll bar. And again, this is fully built in. It's what you're seeing here again is one line of code. It's essentially the same one line of code. In this instance, it requires AccuTerm GUI because the driver that we have is written to AccuTerm GUI. It could be written to something else, but the driver that exists and that is fully fleshed out and has years of proof is to AccuTerm GUI. So that, I think, pretty much, that summarizes a significant, not all of the demo, but a significant chunk of it. Yeah, at that point.
Yeah, let's go show a couple other things, and then let's come back to the object.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So, what I'm thinking, where I think you're headed right now is some of the other things that we hooked in. Again, each one of these is one line of code.
Well, right, and we saw the calendar in character mode.
Right.
Now this is the calendar graphically rendered.
Right. Again, this is delivered with Symbion.
Which has a lot of neat features in terms of dealing with large date sets as well as we're going through.
Or you can click on today, and you're good to go. And also, there's an interface to it, but it's especially easy in the graphical environment that if you want to pass a list to the object to say, for these dates, use these colors.
Let's see if we have any audio.
In 2000, it's May 2013, I think it was. Oh, great. Okay. So that's an example of where it got hooked into existing data. So those two colors, the light green and the dark green, have significance in Gary's. What you're seeing here is an example of Gary's accounting package. This is truly Gary's accounting package in real time, and Gary's going to need to tell you what the light green and the dark green represent.
Well, we'll talk about the dark green really. I mean, if you look at, again, going back to the power of the select object, something like this is a journal entry screen, and so a user sitting down and saying, I've got journal entries out there. Yes, I could bring up that list in text mode in terms of seeing February 15th, 2015, October 31st, 2018, but there's something more compelling about actually taking those search results, funneling into the calendar function to display results. And so in this case, there's activity for July 6th, 13th, and 20th. And somehow that's more compelling in some situations than seeing a list of those 3 dates.
Right.
So as I page through the calendar, I can see the dates that have activity, which in this case are the dark gray.
Well, you're
Okay.
showing a value, but you're showing it in a larger context, which does make it more compelling.
Yes, exactly.
And it doesn't, and you can also set up color rules to colorize different cells of the grid, because it's a grid. We can colorize at the grid, at the cell level. We can colorize different cells based on different values, whether it's a positive or a negative for that day, for example, or whatever. And the ones that were light green were because they were in preceding or succeeding months. In this particular, we changed it to A and V. You want to do with GLH rather? Okay. This is an example. I'm looking at my cheat sheet here, and this is a handout for later on. What we did here was set a single instruction to call the message handler on that particular piece of data. We simply wanted to show that, again, with one line we can call the message handler. The next one that we have is on the list here is X, Gary, for Symbion codes. And I'm going to let Gary explain this a little bit, but the idea here is these are simply a couple of other forms that we have in the Symbion environment that we wanted to be able to show some of the ordinary Symbion functionality using AccuTerm GUI, and this is another form that's conveniently available for us to illustrate on. And I'm not going to go into any elaborate detail about this other than to illustrate, to show you the kinds of things that are possible. And so if you make a choice, Gary, oh yeah, right, we made a choice on this color table, and if we go to a different item that displays the data differently in a different grid, right, these are just other built-ins. So this is a file that we have that we use a lot of frequently in Symbion. It's a tables file, and we have our internal copy of it for maintaining internal structures, and then for your application, for an application in the account where the application lives, we can build a file with the same layout, which is, I'm oversimplifying, but it's basically attributes 1, 2, 3, and so on. And we can plug whatever data we want to in there and use this built-in interface to it, which has a bunch of different possible displays, some of which we only use internally, but you can also use you can build a tree with it, and what Gary's showing there is that this particular thing, we call it a sidebar. You can think of it as a pop-up, which we can drag around. Another capability that we can deploy using AccuTerm GUI. Remember, all this stuff that you're seeing was all triggered from a character application.
So the idea, really, the premise here is, we'll
in
look
this
at the
particular
object,
example,
we'll look at the object definition a little bit, but in conjunction with using the objects, you're going to find, or we could find, the use of tables are very convenient to build validation lists and things like that. And so this is just an example form that could be used to build the table as one example, but I think primarily it's to show example of hooking from your character-based application to something new. So you want to write something new, you need to add some new fields to the screen, you run out of screen space, you want to touch that 3,000 line program, you don't want to touch it anymore. So instead maybe add functionality to that existing form by plugging in either graphical forms or character-based forms,
right,
that are standalone, separate from the application. The whole idea, again, don't touch what you have. You can add it and dovetail from that.
It doesn't have to be this form. We just use this as an example. It can be whatever form you need it to be for your own purposes. The last two that we'll show then is J and JS.
Okay, we already kind of looked at that.
Right. So
let's look at JS as an example.
well, call J again just to get the reference. Okay, so this is the journal entry screen in the graphical form. Okay, nothing magical about that. When Gary leaves this and he uses JS, which is just, it's a key that we have for displaying in a character mode, this is Symbion. This is a true Symbion traditional character form that is exactly the same form you just saw in graphical mode. They're both built at the same time on the same objects. They're both using the same definitions for the fields. They're both using the same lookups. They're both using the same validation rules. The only difference is that in order to create this, there's one more step that is done to define the layout on the terminal. That's it.
We show this example as a situation, I think Rick mentioned earlier, is you don't have AccuTerm. You've got some existing application, system builder or something similar to that. This can be run natively on all those applications. So the character implementation is natively written. It has nothing to do with AccuTerm.
Right. It's not specific to AccuTerm.
Right. So it can be deployed on any site.
And when Gary leaves this, it returns simply by executing the instruction on AccuTerm to save an image of this terminal screen before he instructed it to, not superimpose, because I said that wrong, before he instructed it to display the Symbion character form. He saved in AccuTerm, he gave it the instruction to save the image of the layout, the image of the terminal screen at that moment, and then call it back. So that's how that happened. That was not an overlay in the sense that that was just, this could happen just as easily on a WISE 50. So I'm watching the time here, and I want to. The next thing that we would do then is show the program code. Is that good?
You missed a few.
Did I? Well, I'm
going to show two more here. There's two more on the list.
Okay, so we can go through that. We can go through that. Sure.
So this is just an example of hooking into a form that would give you an alternate menuing system. In this case. And I think we bring this up as a key point here, Rick, is that once you link in the environment, all the screen management, all the execution management is handled automatically for you. And so when we go from your character-based screen to this environment, there's no executes. There was no level pushing that occurred here. It's all mapped itself. So we go from form to form to form to form, we stay on the same level. So our performance is very good because we're not consuming any unnecessary resources to do that. So
True.
The mapping of the environment is built in. The objective here would be, again, if you had an existing application and you had maybe a crude menuing system, you want something a little more sophisticated, a little more user-friendly, you may plug into this. It gives you a couple capabilities that you might not have otherwise, which is an automatic connection into, as you can see over here, the documentation for the actual choice.
Which is a built-in.
Which is a built-in. Or you're in a touchscreen environment, so now these buttons are touchable, and so you're using a touchscreen actually on your application. And I think that's probably the key points in terms of adding enhancement or additional functionality to it.
And when Gary was navigating around in there among that button set, he was using the cursor keys to move around among the buttons. You can click on it, or you can use cursor keys to move around among the buttons. So, and then the next one you had was K, I believe. The keyboard, yeah.
Just to show some touchscreen capability, assume this was a touchscreen. we'd use a keyboard that can come up virtually. It can come up on demand. It can have multiple keyboards. The keyboards itself are all table driven. And so you can have 300 different versions of the keyboard if you wanted to. We don't care. But it's all built in and tied in automatically to the functionality of the application. So it actually works pretty nice. You know, there's hitting F6, bringing back the data.
It's behaving the same as though he was actually using his keyboards. This could be a kiosk. This is a virtual keyboard for a kiosk, for example, that can appear and disappear as needed. Another built-in.
You can see it's smart enough. You're going to hit the shift key. It's the keyboard is changing to shift or unshift. Same with control keys. But what I like about it is just, again, table-driven. Any number of keyboards, any kind of configuration you care to build. Doesn't really matter. All evoked through an object.
That's very cool, I have to admit.
Okay.
So, given that, if you'll stand up and walk people through the changes.
So when we looked at the first program, that's basically this right here. That was what we first looked at, the demo one, the dumb.
Right.
The
greens or the character form.
So to plug into the environment requires a couple things. We've got to include the comment block. It's a name comment block that Symbion uses. You include it in the statement. The comment block is everything in the world in the universe. There's nothing hidden in the comment block. Everything is there. These two lines of code are just for demo purposes. So I can plug into the character result interface or the graphical result interface. You probably not have this in your situation. You use one or the other most likely. This is the key line. This tells us to enter the environment with the type of interface that's being used.
Right, so we're in that case passing a graphical, either passing C for character or G for graphical, right. And you can set a default.
From there we dropped into the same program, and what we did is we put a hook on the ID prompt right here. So this is we added this line of code to the existing Demo 1 program. So go to ID branch. So here's the hook points. This is an AccuTerm specific that just saves the screen so we can restore the screen, but you know, most emulation have a similar kind of technique. Just a few variables set up to control the response to the choices. What I want to really get into is the case statement. So it's just a case statement that says when I typed in GLH, it came back with that bad zip message. So that was the interface that we used for that. We typed in the 8, which we didn't hear it, but it played a sound.
Make my day.
Mm-hmm. We typed in video, we told it to evoke a video of choice. And I commented out one versus this is the original one we put in your one you supplied today. The C, we said bring up the calendar. We put an X, bring up the code form. J was the journal entry. JS was an instruction to flip the environment. So we were in a graphical environment, we switched to the character environment and back to the graphical environment. The menu, the keyboard, and this is the search guide. This is when you're talking about Kevin. So this is a line of code that we said, hey, I'm going to use, in this case, we've got a macro called view. Most of the instructions are, as Rick indicated, macro driven. So there's a key macro view now, and there's, I don't know, 40 or 50 macros that we use. We want to do a lookup rule using this object. This is a named object. And we also want to give it an initial data search. So based upon if I typed in nothing versus something.
Initial data search is a keyword to the macro.
And we're going to go ahead and look at this as we'll spend the remaining time on. So based upon the case statement, we set up a macro request. The program just checks, did you enter a macro in the case statement? If such, we evoke a general program. It passes the macro. It does its thing. If it's a macro that involves picking something, then that pick is going to return it in one of the common block variables, in this case, the S of 11. Don't be, I don't know what the word is, intimidated, overwhelmed by the cryptic common block. I use very terse common variable structure. It goes back to old days where we only had 7 or 8 characters per label. So mine are very tight, but nothing prevents you from establishing your own common block with named variables in that common block. So this could be ZC equals pick value. So you equate pick value to ZS sub 11, you're done. And you just use that.
I used to push up against that in the early days with working with Gary, but I discovered that he is so consistent about how he uses these short references to the common block that after a while I thought there are about 100 of them that I need to know. I could write them all down on one piece of paper, give them names, and at that point it doesn't matter. I'm going to memorize them anyway. It's always going to be the same ones. The name is a name is a name, and if I type ZS sub 11, I'm less likely to key it wrong than if I type some long name that I might misspell. And so over time I actually adopted Gary's standard because Gary is extremely consistent.
Well, and I'll maybe clarify what you said. I mean, there's 7,000 or 8,000 common block variables available to you, of which you can use maybe a dozen. You know, the rest are internal kinds of things. They're there, so you can touch them if you want. But in this example, we're using a single one is all we're referencing here. That's it.
ZS sub 11 has a consistent functionality in the environment. Every time you use it, it's used for passing.
Well, ZS sub 11 is used for the pick results of any kind of lookup object.
There you go.
Okay, so
that's its definition.
So in this case, ZS sub 11 is multi-attributed. So if your object allows multiple picks, and we brought up the zip code table, but we might establish that object say I can pick more than one. And so that contact is going to be driven back, or those picks will be driven back through ZS sub 11. And so your application can then do whatever it needs to do with ZS sub 11 as such. If you're in the full graphical environment, you know, you don't even see any of this stuff because it's just part of it.
It's all automatic.
It's all automatic.
But the ZS sub 11 is part of the API set, but it always returns it's the only time it's ever used in the environment is for that very specific case to return the results of a lookup. Period.
So the idea, do whatever you need to do. I mean, this is just an example of a series of hooks from a field. Obviously, it can be from any number of fields. You could generalize this very easily with your own program. You know, you may not even see this in demo 2. You might have taken this, created a standalone interface program that had this stuff to it.
Right, and called it.
And called it. And it doesn't really matter. It's whatever you choose to do for it.
So what I would be inclined to do at this point is flip on the lights and pass out the copies of the code, and we can talk about that. So I'll wait a moment and get another bit of water and see if you guys have any questions about how we programmatically tied that in.
Okay.
Could you guys imagine how you could take how somebody could take an existing SB application and integrate these few lines of code in it and have it actually function? Okay.
I mean, I think the other thing too is, you know, I think we've all experienced the difficulty of a client trying to make the transition from the old to the new. I think, you know, through trial and error, through hit and miss,
right.
I think we've concluded that the best approach is a real solo approach in the sense of, let's take your existing application, let's start plugging in some easy things to it that can increase value right now, tomorrow, today, in the next 3 minutes. You can make your own choice then of how you take that, go from point A to point Z. So at some point down the road, you might have been fully converted to a full graphical application, but you've done it on your own time, the way you want to do it.
At a pace that works for you.
At a pace that works for you.
Right.
Rick,
Sir.
as the client, though, that gives you a challenge, doesn't it? Because you're primarily using a different terminal.
That was what we talked about. With SP Plus, a non-AccuTerm environment, if you wanted some of these capabilities, if we looked and said, hey, there's value to the lookup search capability that I don't have right now, well, you can plug that in on a character mode basis right now. And so even with SP Plus or SP Term, the application will work. You just won't get the graphical rendition of the results. You'll get the character rendition of the results. But any object that you do, as we talked about, is reusable and portable.
Right, the rules.
So the rules are the key to
portable.
the application anymore. You know, you take those, you take the rules with you. And so if tomorrow you decide to change, you haven't lost investment and time to develop those objects because you can pick them up and use them anywhere you want. This application is portable across all the PIC platforms. YouTube, you know, University of Data, Oasis, JBase, D3, QM. Runs exactly the same, 100%. All portable. You pick it up, you can go install it, ready to run. So there's nothing you have to do to make that happen.
So, if it's okay.
But that's the key.
Yes.
To me is, how do you make it so someone is so they're not overwhelmed about trying to make a choice about making a decision to do something. I think this is pretty, not overwhelming, it's pretty easy. Just start using it. If you like it, great. If you don't, don't use it.
and with all due respect to Stuart and Kevin, with respect to SB,
Why are you being singled out?
I'm just honoring you guys.
That's not what you said. I'm sorry.
In the environment, obviously, on a machine, I can have SB client and I can have AccuTerm also. So I could, if I have the appropriate licensing on my machine, I could log on twice.
Mm-hmm.
Once through AccuTerm and once through SB client. I believe that would probably work on D3 at least. And and use the dual logon capabilities, and I could be creating fully graphical applications or just chunks of an application in using Symbion for AccuTerm, pointing it at AccuTerm GUI that matter to me, like you saw with the accounting application, and over here I could have SB running at the same time. The Symbion and SB are completely compatible, and they can coexist on the same machine at the same time with no problem. They're just, you know, SB loads into one account and Symbion loads into a different account, and everything operates accordingly out of the box. You know, it's however things are cataloged.
What you might find surprising is of a lot of our customers that are using character-based system builder, they use AccuTerm.
Okay, great. Then they have it.
They've just decided they're not going to go to GUI, they're going to just stick with character-based,
Okay.
so AccuTerm was a better investment for them.
True.
So it's already there. I mean, the whole graphical engine is delivered with every copy of AccuTerm. There's no additional charge. It's just there.
I think we might have mentioned that in the last year when we were out here too, is that if you are using the graphical rendition, as I heard you say several times, all host-based completely. There's nothing being updated on the client.
Right on the client.
Period. It's all communication layer to the client only. So any changes you made are immediate. They're done. There's no deployment that you have to do, which makes it very simple.
You ever seen that picture where there's a starting bubble at the top, this is start, and it goes down into this flow chart that has lines that are going in all sorts of directions, and over the side it says, then magic happens.
Yeah.
Yes, then magic happens.
So, there's a whole lot of magic here, right? There's a whole lot of stuff in these entry points, these macros, that for all intents and purposes, for those of us looking up from the outside in, is magic. That's what I'd be interested to see. Rick, you said something earlier about, let me show you how easy it is. Just easy, I get that. But there's a lot of magic here.
Sure.
Pull back the veil a little bit. Let's see a little bit.
Well,
don't be pulling back on me.
no, all I'm going to say, Kevin, is you know that if we start down that conversation, and I'm happy to do that now or in a go-to-meeting or another day here, that can turn into like a 4-hour conversation easily. For Gary and me to do a reasonably comprehensive show and tell about how Symbion is built and how it's actually, you know, constructed and it works and all that stuff, because there's over 30 years of man work in it. It really is deep and sophisticated, and you've seen, you know, we've shown you a demo of it, so you have some experience, Kevin, about what that looks like. We have no problem doing that here. I just want to make sure that we're using our last 45 minutes or so well with you guys for these purposes tonight. We're more than happy to answer whatever
I
questions.
look at it, I won't call it magic. Is there a lot that goes on? Absolutely. I mean,
I think
it's
The
huge.
word now appears here
Yes.
7 times. And I'm kind of thinking that that 3-letter word is magic.
Yes.
That's the thing that I'm looking at going, yeah, that's where some magic is going to happen. And, I'm not asking to look at the bits and bytes of the thing here. It's not so much of a concern. I'm looking at the 10-mile up ISIS satellite. Show me their bodies on the ground, and that's what I'm trying to say.
I think if I take what you're asking and actually go to the other side, if I was in your shoes, and if I wanted to get involved with this, I'd want to warm and fuzzy about, is that approach really solid? Does it fit my philosophy? Is it something I know that I can trust and rely on? Those are the kinds of things I'd ultimately want to know. And as Rick,
But you use the word object 16 times. He used the word object at least 12. And yet you haven't really shown us what that means.
Real quick before we go into the object definition, I'll show you there's several tiers here. One tier being the macros that we've been looking at.
Right.
Here are the macros. Here they are. I'm looking at the now macro. Now tell me what the now macro is all about.
So all your documentation is self-contained at this point?
It is.
Okay.
Right.
This is what we refer to as the edit assistant.
So when you want to build the now, you can actually use the edit system to build the now for you if you want, as opposed to typing it out yourself. But the key here is this will go through the definition of the now, all the different parameters that can be evoked in the now, because the now is the key, the heart. Absolutely, Kevin. No question. Rick asked me, where did I come up with now? And I said, I don't know. Just now. I want it now.
Now do this. Now do that. That fits. It's elegant in its simplicity.
Gary is like almost, I don't want to say,
Be gentle.
fatally humble. Fatally humble. I have worked with him for 10 years on this, and I am so blown away by the way, not just Gary's ability to code, but the way he thinks about stuff. It never ceases to amaze me. What he just did was he hit the F5 key, which is a built-in across the entire environment on any field, and you'll see in the designer, because we have a version of the designer that will fit on this incredibly tiny resolution monitor, right? Which is 1024 by 768. Yeah. So when you see it, it's going to be like really squished in, because the design studio in full form is set up for 1920 by 1024. Okay, so we have a version of it that's scrunched down to fit on something this tiny. The reason I'm mentioning that is because when you hit F5, it brings up this text control, multi-line text control, that it computes on the fly based on an algorithm how much of the screen it should take up, and from wherever the field is that you were on, it populates the multi-line text control with that information. It's a built-in. It works every place. You'd have to turn it off for it to not work, and you can, but you wouldn't want to. If Gary hits F5 again, it will become the size of the whole window. And if he hits F5 again, it goes back to the smaller size, and then if he hits escape once, it disappears. So when we show you the designer, you'll see that we have a couple of fields in the designer for documentation, and we sacrifice the space, and they're like 10 characters wide and 4 lines high. But you hit F5 once or twice, and it'll take up the whole screen, so you can still edit the data that's in those fields. Basically, they simply become access points. F5 is one of a number of things that works every place across the environment automatically. It's just one of more of the ways that Gary thinks that I found to be just truly compelling. I said, I think we need something like this. And Gary goes away for a couple of weeks and comes back with a whole subsystem that suddenly adds functionality that we just hadn't thought of before. The design is the edit assistant grew out of my frustration with trying to memorize the stuff. And I said, Gary, you know all these things. I mean, the guy's got an amazing memory for all this. I said, what command do I need for this? And he said, okay, I need to work on something. So the edit assistant grew out of it. And if you move up to the, when you want to show the miscellaneous, and the reason I'm asking about that is when he switches the miscellaneous, and you switch into this grid here, go ahead and click on any of the lines, Gary. This has the miscellaneous has 75 modifiers. So well, actually, I'm sorry, it has 75 lines, which include the blanks. Mm-hmm. But for example, the miscellaneous command, this was another joke that grew out of one of our conversations at like 1 o'clock in the morning one time. He was adding capabilities like setting foreground and background colors and changing font types and point sizes and all that stuff in real time, in a running form. And he said, what are we going to call this thing? And we talked about it for a while, and we tried to come up with some kind of clever name. And one of us said to the other, well, how about miscellaneous? I mean, you know, it's just like all this other stuff. What are we going to call it? Other. And that's where the miscellaneous command came from. And it had like 4 or 5 or 6 modifiers in it now. I mean, at that time, and now it's got like 60 modifiers. We just, for things that have to do with changing properties on the fly, they ended up in the miscellaneous. So we can show you the syntax for using the miscellaneous, for example.
Well, hold on, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here.
Sure.
Because you know, you're getting into the deep dive stuff here, and I still don't have a picture of where does a person actually start when they get into this.
Got it. Let's proceed on to the object that defined the lookup, so that it can relate to something you've already seen.
All right, so let me infer something based on what you just said. There is an object for lookup, meaning that there are various objects in different configurations for different types of functions. System Builder calls them processes, you call them objects, but they are in effect a brick that you build your application with. Each brick has a size and a shape and a particular configuration, and in your case they're objects, and those objects have properties. Is that a correct statement?
I'd say so, yes.
Okay.
And the kinds of objects that we create in the environment, there are 2 kinds of objects only. The objects can come in a whole bunch of different flavors and forms with different properties and capabilities, but in the architecture, the big picture architecture, we have container objects and data objects. The form, like this is the design studio, and the design studio itself is an application that's written in itself. All the data objects live in some container someplace, a library container, or several library containers, or they might live in a form container. So if Gary goes into the...
yeah, if you look at that line, if line 75 is accurate, that will look at the view macro, all right? Okay. So it said lookup equals Symbion objects star zip. That's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at this star zip object. And keep in mind, as Rick indicated here, that this is an abbreviated version of Designer. It's squished, but it works. So here our container, our plural is objects.
Okay.
Within it, we have a number of properties, number of singular.
Okay,
right.
Number of individual singular objects. Okay.
In this case, zip happens to be the very last one, but we have a number. There's a number of them here, and this is completely arbitrary in terms of what's in here.
124 of them, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
But all of those are not on this form, right? This is a kind of collection from which to choose.
These are this is a library.
Library, gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha.
This is a library, but you can have 1,000 different libraries if you care to have them.
Okay.
We have a couple libraries that we collect.
So Symbion.objects is a library that we deliver that has a lot of common stuff that we use around the environment a lot.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So in this case, we're looking at the zip. So here are the properties for zip, but we're really only interested in this subsection of the properties. This is our lookup definition.
Okay.
Where we indicate what evokes the object. It can be evoked through a query, or it can be evoked through entering data. So there's a separation in the object that says, hey, what do you want to do if someone has absolutely no clue what they're looking for?
Right.
Versus, hey, I've typed something in, okay, what do you want to do based upon what they've typed in?
Okay.
And that can be established so it works on both, one or the other. Description is just an internal description of the
Well, we don't need to
lookup
go
rule.
prompt by prompt, really,
Yeah.
not for my purposes, but
Okay.
I see where you're going with this. And then, so building an application isn't, in fact, building new objects.
Just building new objects.
When you're building a new application in this thing, what you're doing is taking the existing objects and combining them with new things to build new objects.
Correct.
And the application then becomes the use of those objects in the context of whatever the application happens to be.
Yes.
Right, and if you don't have the objects, you just, you start from scratch to create the objects that you need for that purpose. You can.
So if somebody wanted to create an object from scratch, where do they start?
They start
They start in with 1,000 prompts on the screen, or is it a new hello.world?
and we've gone back and forth on that, Kevin. It's like, okay, we've tried really simplified, saying, hey, we think this is what you need, and find out tomorrow you need more than that. It's been the shuffle game trying to figure out how much to show. So instead, what we've done is we've tableized the properties. In this case, the lookup properties and everything else, and there's several hundred of everything else.
Right.
When you establish an object, the object itself inherits default values, and that's what this indicates over here. So in general, when you build a new object, for the most part, you're only going to look at a dozen or less things of the 300 things you can choose from.
Right.
Because the rest are going to be defaulted based upon shell objects that you identify to the object. And so, we talk about collection of objects can then be referred to in a default basis. Hey, when I create a new object, use that collection of objects to default what the properties for this object are going to be.
Okay.
And so what happens is this column shows you the inherited values. This shows you the localized values. So these are the things I'm inheriting. Don't even have to touch them. If I want to change it, then I'm changing it here.
So you would have something like this for a form, just a basic form object, and then you customize it like this to make the form yours for your application.
That's right.
I think one place we could go, Gary, is to show the Symbion zip codes graphical form, because it has 3 fields.
Okay. Well, okay.
Right. So now if we
This is a real simple form. This is what we cloned the demo 1.02 off of. It's just an ID, 3 fields. That's all there's to it.
So if we go into the designer for that,
There are 4 objects right here.
Okay.
The ID field and the 3 content fields. The ID is logically separated from the body components for lots of reasons. The ID is always the tricky part of an application. Whether that be a single part key, a multiple part key, a join key, but it's defined as a separate set of the form.
Okay.
Okay? So we define the ID componentry, we define the body componentry. So these are the 4 objects that we're looking at on that form. Zip to zip, city to city, etc.
And then at some point you had something to position those and put them on the form the way you wanted them. But effectively you're looking at, well, see, that doesn't look like the form.
It's a, I think of it as we used to do the old model kits and scale model kits. The premise of the designer is to show you logically everything that's happening.
Okay.
So when we're looking at a singular object, such as city, I'm looking at its property content. Right. But if I want to look at what state is, I click on state, I'm seeing the state's properties.
Okay.
I'm not having to leave this to go someplace else. So you really, so the idea is to show you as much as we can about everything that's happening, and that requires that the physical layout be smaller than the actual result.
Okay.
And there's
Because we can't fit this. If we fit it, we're taking up the whole screen.
Right.
and there's another uber important reason for this. We allocate space. Each one of these cells correlates to a certain number of pixels. We allocate screen real estate to not an individual field necessarily. We can show you, in this case, these are individual fields. If this was a grid that had 1 or 2 or 10 columns, we would allocate an area on the form to the grid, and then we declare which columns, which pieces of data live within that defined space at what widths. And
You're in the weeds again, Rick. You're in the weeds again. My apologies, I don't mean to interject here, but all that, I follow what you're going to, but the calculation of pixels isn't helping really. That doesn't.
The significant thing, Kevin, is that Symbion figures out where the caption should be.
That's the piece I'm looking for
yes,
right there.
It manages, it computes all that stuff for us, so we don't actually have to lay it out physically. It does all that work for us.
So
I
I look at this as a symbolic representation of our end result. And it's used for very easily changing the sizing, the positioning, without us having to go through the mechanics of it. But as importantly, it's also used in the scaling application. So you render a screen at a 1024 by 768. Well, how should that screen look if it's actually on a large monitor, 1920?
Right.
And so the symbolic notation allows us to scale the end result up or down based upon the device that it actually is running on. So it's one-stop shopping. You build one thing and render it on multiple devices of different sizes automatically, and you don't have to worry about.
Because you are not manually positioning
Correct.
everything, you're letting it do it based on the rules that you've established, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Okay. And we found that the rules that we established work 99% of the time. And the 1%,
1%.
and that last 1%, we allow you to override.
Okay, cool.
It's in the property set.
Yeah. But it's literally just, I'm going to copy this so I can play with it a little bit here. We'll copy it. So what I've done, I've just cloned that container object, called it Rick. So I've got a complete replication of it. Now I'm going to come down here. Now, if I want to change the position, I'm just dragging in, where these things should show. If I were to re-render this now.
All right.
If I want to make it bigger, I'm making it bigger.
Go ahead and re-render it and show it again, Gary, because I want to point out something. I'm going to notice the positioning of the captions, right? There are frames with the captions showing here. Okay. Oh, and by the way, this one includes companion controls that have defined functionality for F2 and Control O, because this has a lookup on it. So all this additional stuff that you see gets computed in automatically. The arrows show up because we defined functionality, and we chose to allow the default behavior of show the companion controls instead of suppressing them, which we could. So what that just did was it called a lookup control. It means it called a lookup object. And so in the layout, what you saw was a bit of space allocated for that, and all of the stuff that happened within it was automatic. The layout of the fact that this shows up as with the caption here instead of to the left is an option. If we change a property setting, it will change the behavior and put the caption to the left. It'll make the caption bigger. It'll make this space for the data smaller or whatever. So
what I found over time, Kevin, is that most application generator, and I suppose System Builder is the same thing, it requires a data field with two components, a label and a data component. What do you want to call it? What lives there? We've actually approached it differently by combining into one highlighted view or high objective view. Yeah, we think of this as a
One
single
object.
object, of which within it, there's label properties and data properties within the single object. And so you build one thing, not two things, and so they go together. It doesn't prevent you from building two separate ones if that's what you want to do.
Right, right.
For convenience, you build a thing, and it carries forward with that.
So
Before you
you've
leave-
obviously got the basic GUI type controls, right? You've got text controls and buttons and text areas and those sorts of things.
And that would be
When you're building, you
type of
know,
control.
when you're releasing this kind of thing, how many of your own objects are you adding on in addition to that? Because you have various, you know, button grid kind of things and a grid control and you know, these other things that are kind of unique to this environment. The scroll thingy that you had, you know, how many additional objects would you say you added into the whole GUI thing that are kind of unique to your environment?
That's a good question. I'd have to think about that a little bit. That's a good question. I
Because
mean,
you've obviously put properties out the wazoo here. You got properties for everything.
you got properties for
If you show the type of control, Gary, would that partially answer?
Well, I don't think that's really what Kevin's
Okay.
asking. He's
I'm
just
not really
saying,
looking to get too deep into that. It just, I'm kind of,
what I ended up doing, just from a general standpoint, is I took the basic collection of GUI objects, the standard things that we all have available to us, like you just indicated.
right.
And so how can we re-architect basically by taking characteristics of those and merging them into something new and using it that way? And that's, you know, there's probably maybe a dozen areas like that we have something that really doesn't exist in the world that we've taken componentry and made our new widget out of it.
Right.
And the key to that is that technique is available to you. So you can do the same thing by building your own new widgets out of combinations of things and calling it whatever. Because there's nothing that we're doing here that you don't do or can't do because it is the same. Everything we're doing here is built by the tool, period. There's no functionality here that you don't have access to. It's 100% the same thing. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
That actually answered my question very well. Thank you. And I'm kind of at the end of my questions, much to the celebration of everyone else. Thank you.
This video highlights a fraction of the broad capabilities of the Symbion Application Platform. For any major multi-value or PIC database environment, from 1 to 1,000 users and hundreds of different simultaneous business processes. For more than 30 years, Gary Huffer has architected and refined Symbion to meet some amazingly demanding data processing and reporting requirements. For more information about Symbion and how it can help you transform your business software creation, development, and maintenance life, email mvinfo@streamthink.com. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate your interest.
And the next one we have on the list, Gary, was going in order here is A. So if I,
It doesn't seem to.
is that not, oh, you know what, I have the, let me,
We can't hear it. Right?
yeah, so is, here, try, oh yeah, it's still gonna, that's not gonna work. Okay, forget that idea. So what that did was it played an audio file, and it played it in a very interesting way. The audio file said, "Make my day." That was the Clint. Was that right? The Clint Eastwood "Make My Day."
The idea being there, you know, we think of typical error messages, textual response. but what if you want to make it visual? What if you want it audible? And so you can hook into all those components. You may find someone who's visually challenged that the application should be speaking to them. It shouldn't be showing messages on the screen. And so you could hook that kind of capability in via the messaging.
Right. So the next thing that we have a built-in is the ability to hook a video. So Gary, if you do the V and the video, hey, the video actually play. You won't hear this. I'll narrate it. This is only 3 minutes long. This is very cool. This comes from this is 3 minutes from an hour-long thing that you can find on YouTube about the Cheyenne helicopter, which we all owe our livelihoods to. I'm sure that all of you have heard at one time or another of the Cheyenne helicopter. It was the project at Lockheed in Los Angeles in the 1960s for which one of the specifications was the GIRLS, G-I-R-L-S, Generalized Information Retrieval Language System that we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of this year. The origin of PIC came as a result of this project. And the reason I have a particular love for this is the test pilot for the Cheyenne helicopter is somebody I personally know. So the guy who his name is Don Segner, the fellow who flew this amazing craft first and set some amazing results and records with it was somebody I've known for I don't know 15 years probably, and I like to honor him given the opportunity. And there he is, right there in the front. And this is in 1967. So while this was being built at Lockheed, down the road in El Segundo at TRW, these two characters and a couple of their cronies in some back room named Dick Pick and Don Nelson, who actually Don is the guy who actually came up with the idea for the data model originally. They were working to create the generalized language that we know as English and Access and all this other stuff for this project, because the military, as part of the specification, said we want some easy way to be able to maintain the parts inventory for this craft, and also be able to do drill downs into the bill of materials, so that when they're out in deployment, it'll be easier for people to maintain the craft because they'll have good documentation for it. This is where our technology originated from. And sadly, the project was canceled, which upset Don no end, because it was an amazing craft. Right here, that thing is flying by at more than 200 miles an hour. That's a helicopter going more than 200 miles an hour in 1967 or 1968. The thing was a stunning piece of technology. But thankfully, since the project was canceled, the technology that they were working on at TRW became public domain, and Dick didn't waste any time taking it down the road to Orange County, to Irvine, and the guys at Microdata. And that's where all this started. So, there's a neat video. And by the way, this is what you're seeing here with this button set is actually, that's a tableized set of buttons. So we didn't have to go out and position all these buttons and set up all these captions, we created a table that had that data in it, those data elements, and said, create a table, and there it is right there. So that's the table.
So if we were to actually modify the table, I'll just duplicate the lines.
Okay, and refresh that.
Which one did I do?
GL menu.
I'm not sure what I did that. Oh, this is a ribbon. I'd have to build this, right?
Okay.
It's a ribbon.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So what Gary did was he modified the table that drives that, and we can show you later. Don't take the data out yet, Gary.
No,
we can
okay,
we can go in later into the design studio and call up the definition for this window and simply re-render all the control data, and those additional lines those additional captions and functionality will appear in the appropriate buttons depending on whether it was I think it was probably this one, I'm guessing.